Welcome to Living Well with MS. This podcast comes to you from Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity, which helps people live a full and healthy life through the Overcoming MS program. We interview a range of experts and people with multiple sclerosis. Please remember, all opinions expressed are their own. Don't forget to subscribe to Living Well with MS on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And now, let's meet our guest.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Living Well with MS podcast. Joining me on this edition is Phil King from the UK. Phil is doubly qualified to join us on the podcast because he is both a person with MS as well as being an MS nurse. So welcome, Phil.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. And so to start off with, can you tell us a bit about your MS journey and your professional journey and how they interact?
Yeah, so I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2012. I'd had symptoms before that, just on and off symptoms. It was tingling. I had problems with my left eye. So particularly when I went for a run, I couldn't always see properly. But then as soon as I stopped, it went back to normal. And I'm sure that the same with many people, because these symptoms are quite mild, I'd go along just to see my GP and just mention it in passing if I was there for something else, or an optician, and say, look, I don't know if my contact lenses are quite right, I'm not sure, but the vision in my left eye is reduced, but it's okay now. And it was always pretty much brushed off either by, look, you exercise well, you eat well, I wouldn't let it worry you. And then, say, 2012 came the biggie, where my vision in my left eye just disappeared. So essentially, when I was exercising, I couldn't see a thing, which was pretty scary. I mean, I was a nurse anyway, so I was thinking, "Oh my goodness, what on earth is this? This is terrible."
So you've got a long list of things that it could have been then, presumably.
Oh, long list. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which are probably some of which are terrifying.
Some of which are very terrifying. Yes, absolutely. And interestingly, I hadn't thought of MS straight away. It wasn't until I noticed that it was getting worse in heat and then disappearing. I thought, I think I might know what this is. I think this could be MS. And of course, I spoke to a couple of friends about it, and they said, "No, it's not MS. You're too fit for it to be that. Don't be daft, Phil." And I said, "Yeah, but I have got tingling in my leg, and you need to stretch more. Come on, man up," type of thing. And so, cut a very long story short, I saw a neurologist, and the neurologist said to me, "Okay, Phil, what do you think the problem is?" And I said, "I think I've got MS." And he just went quiet for a minute, and he said, "Yeah, I think you're right." Oh my goodness. But luckily for me, I'd read a little bit about MS, and of course, unfortunately, it's quite doom and gloom, and you read a lot of stories about people who'd had MS for many years that probably hadn't had any treatment years ago, who are now fairly poorly. But amongst all that, I saw a blog from Rebecca Hoover, and she was talking on her site about how to overcome MS. And I was thinking, oh, this is how much money does she want? She can make me better, can she? I see, rightio. And she pointed towards, obviously, George Jelinek and Overcoming MS program. And I looked at it and thinking, if this is so good, why is not everyone with MS following this? And I then, of course, noticed that he's not asking for any money. All his advice was on the site. I brought the book and basically started following OMS just before I got diagnosed. So when I got my formal diagnosis, I'd already started.
Yeah, I was the same actually.
Yeah.
And it was that same thing. It was like, they're not asking for any money. They even sent me the book for free.
Yes, indeed.
So,
yeah.
So they didn't even ask for postage. It was like,
No.
Okay, they're actually sending me this big book and not charging me a penny for it.
No.
And whereas everyone else I'd come across, it was this subscription, this money, this, it was like, okay,
Yeah.
this, I'm a bit skeptical about this.
Yes,
You know,
indeed.
taking this tablet, surely if I just took this tablet and it would cure me
Yeah. Yeah.
for £30
Absolutely.
a month, then everyone would be doing this.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. And yeah, exactly the same. I was thinking just the same as you. Why isn't everyone doing this? Um, and well, you know, of course, as it's with it being a lifestyle change, I guess perhaps it's not not everybody's cup of tea for whatever reason. Um, and yeah,
so you at the time were a general nurse, or is that the right term? Or you weren't an MS
I
nurse at the
wasn't an
time?
MS nurse. No, I wasn't. No. So at the time, I was a renal nurse. So I was looking after kidneys and things like that when it happened, when I got my MS diagnosis. Um, and so yeah, so as far as the nursing goes, a few years afterwards, 2018, I think I saw an advert for an MS nurse, and I thought, well, I've got MS. I'm living pretty well with it. Um, it'd be nice to help others with MS, you know, and speak about, you know, being positive with MS, lifestyle choices, um, and yeah, and just not necessarily trying to force a message of overcoming MS onto every single MS patient, but I just thought, well, if they could see that I'm doing fairly well with it, um, perhaps it might inspire people, and also I was very interested in MS anyway. I find MS fascinating.
I think just the empathy as well. I think almost all MS nurses should have MS. It would be it's like you can't explain it to anyone other than people who've got MS.
No, yeah, indeed.
You know, my wife doesn't fully understand
No,
the things like that. You have good days and bad days, and stress might affect me, and heat might affect me, and but then other people with MS completely understand that. Or they might be different. They go, "Oh no, actually, cold affects me, and this affects me, and that." But they understand that kind of we have that. I think we all understand how it works with each other. That there's this sort of weird thing going on, and I know that my MS nurse is she's brilliant. She's very sympathetic. She doesn't fully understand in the way that kind of we understand, but what's amazing is that you do. So you, and also that first meeting that patients have with you, they actually see someone who is doing well and understands what they're going through, and you think, well, that's brilliant. You're sort of thinking, you know, and I think it's got better actually. You're sort of saying, you know, what you think of when you're told about MS, and certainly yeah, I was sort of diagnosed at a similar sort of time, and it there wasn't really the celebrities that we now have that have got MS that are actually looking quite well, and I
no,
think that's been a big change. And now you've got a few actresses or actors, you should say, you know, and Jack Osborne's
yes,
another one. There's a few people around who are actually looking fine, but that wasn't the case 10 years ago. I just think 10 years ago that wasn't the story of people with MS, and certainly in the media and on TV and news and stuff. But now, hopefully, that will change, and people actually say, "Okay, yeah,
yeah,
Selma Blair's got MS, and you know, there's another actor recently, and you know, and Jack Osborne's doing crazy stunts and things, and so actually, the maybe the narrative will change a bit more, and then
yeah. I hope
it
so.
would improve that."
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly with yeah. So certainly, obviously, receiving that diagnosis of MS from a neurologist, you know, I think this is MS. Obviously, then the next person that they would speak to professionally would be an MS nurse. Um, and yeah, I think it is really important that that first message from a nurse is, okay, well, you know, this is what we can do, and it's it, I just think that if my, I mean, don't get me wrong, my MS nurse is lovely, you know, yeah, very very nice. However, if you spoke to somebody that said, well, yes, I'm your MS nurse, but I've also got it, um, you know, it was like you said, like you mentioned about the empathy. You know, that patient would be sat there thinking, "Oh, well, fantastic." So, not only a nurse, but someone that has got it, and the first thing they ask is, "Okay, you look well. What are you doing?
Mm.
And how long have you had it? What drug are you on? Is there a magic pill?" Um, you know, and of course, you know, we say, well, unfortunately, everyone's MS journey is different. It always is, and other circumstances can come in, so perhaps other infections or so obviously we know about, if you have an infection with MS, obviously it makes MS a lot worse. So
Hmm.
there can be many, as you know, Alex, many sort of like jumps in the road, as it were. Um, but essentially, certainly what I've found is that when people call our MS hotline, if you like, quite a few say, "I want to speak to the nurse that's got it."
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah, I want to speak to the nurse that's got it, and so obviously I do, um, and you pretty much hit the nail on the head when you said that it's great that all nurses you'd like to think are empathetic towards the condition, but they don't know exactly what it's like to have it. Whereas, of course, you and I both know, um, which is great. And I think that when I speak to patients and they say, "Oh, Phil, I've developed something, and can I talk to you about it?" And sometimes I say, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I've had it." And
Yeah.
and don't worry about it, or yes, I've had this, perhaps you need to speak to somebody else about, etc., etc. So that's pretty helpful.
And do you suggest OMS to your patients?
I do, yes, I do. I say to all my patients that if you think that medication alone is going to cure your MS or make it a lot better, medication is very powerful. But what is just as powerful, if not more powerful, is what we eat. Is if we can do some exercise, obviously, stress control, so meditation, obviously vitamin D supplementation, definitely, because being in the northern hemisphere, we don't see much sunshine, and so putting the whole package together. Um, and yeah, I mean, many people say, "Oh, what? So give up burgers and give up fast food." And so then we sometimes have another discussion about, well, fast food isn't terribly great for us anyway, and it's not just MS that could be made worse by that type of diet. It's any other inflammatory condition. So diabetes type 2, heart disease, etc., etc. If you watch what you eat and are careful about what you eat and exercise more, okay, yeah, so the worst that could happen is, okay, well, your MS stays the same, don't see any improvement or anything, but you're stopping getting a barrage of so many other
Hmm.
conditions.
And that's
um
actually what I was told, and I thought that was a really good way of putting it, because the official advice from a neurologist isn't really to do any lifestyle modification, I don't think. And but he said, and because I said, "What do you think about this?" And he knew, he just referred to it as the Jelinek. He knew who George Jelinek was. He didn't really know about it being called Overcoming MS.
mm,
But um, he said, well, at the end of the day, there's nothing proven. However, it is almost certainly going to make you healthier and reduce your chances of getting heart disease, diabetes, cancer. And he just went through a whole long list of things. And he said, so you don't want to get those anyway. And you definitely don't want to get them when you've got MS. And
no,
so,
exactly.
and he said, and then you look at the downsides of it, you're probably going to be cooking more, which is
Yeah,
true. And you might miss cheese, which was
yeah,
also true for a while, but not anymore, actually. After a while, you stop missing cheese, but initially, yeah, because you get used to things, don't you? And sort of,
yeah, you do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been following OMS now for 11 years, and the thought of eating cheese or burgers or anything, in actual fact, this is going to sound really daft, Alex, but I've
it's
actually
Jeff, by the way.
forgotten.
Sorry, Alex, is my surname.
Oh, I'm so
That's all right.
sorry. Oh,
I get it all
sorry,
the
Jeff.
time. Don't worry.
Sorry. You can call me any name you like, by the way. Yeah,
Your
the
surname's
problem.
King, though, so it doesn't really work.
No, no, that's true. But yeah, um, but I've actually forgotten what cheese tastes like. I've forgotten what burgers taste like.
Mhm.
And if I smell burgers now, I think, oh my goodness, that's that. doesn't smell particularly pleasant. And yeah, I think you do get used to eating a certain way, and certainly I guess the fast food um, uh, restaurants would want to obviously to push their product on you as much as possible. You've got the drive-throughs and what have you, but once you get over that, I honestly, I mean, this is just me personally, I honestly don't miss it whatsoever. um, and it's so when I speak to patients who are newly diagnosed, or patients say, okay, what do you do, Phil, because I want to get a bit fitter, I want to do this, that, and the other. um, I say to them that if you don't want to change your diet straight away, if it's not about changing everything in 5 minutes, and saying, okay, well, no more burgers, no more this, no more that. I'm just going to stop everything now. Perhaps doing it in steps, and then starting exercise in steps. No one's going to run a marathon or half marathon with or without MS in 3 months' time with little practice. It is making these changes, and if you have to make changes slowly, fine. It's however you're comfortable with. But this are changes for life. It's not about stopping eating a certain way for 6 months. It's about making these changes forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And so I always emphasize plant-based. And yeah, I've got a few patients that follow Overcoming MS. Funnily enough, Jeff, got your name right this time. Funnily enough, I've got an OMS meeting tonight, 6 o'clock, and they are all people that have got MS that are following Overcoming MS, and the laughs we have are fantastic.
So would you say though that are patients typically keen to add in lifestyle modifications?
Not always, no. I would say that a few people want to make changes. Many people don't, for whatever reason. I mean, habits are very, very difficult to change. As a hypnotherapist said to me many, many years ago, she said, Phil, it takes between 2 to 3 weeks to form a habit, and that's it. So I mean, if you've got a patient that, I don't know, smokes cigarettes, or eats a certain way, or drinks alcohol in a certain way, doesn't exercise, to then suggest overhauling everything is pretty difficult. I think.
Is it 2-3 weeks or 2-3 months?
Well, she always told me 2 to 3 weeks.
Because I'd heard months before.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to cut that bit
No,
out?
no, that's fine. No.
Okay.
No. I just found that it's just a personal thing. I tried, sort of do a dry January thing, and I think you almost at the end of January you're still desperate to have a glass of wine or something. But then I just thought I'm going to try, and it was after about 2 to 3 months, and I just didn't have it cut out any sort of the desire to have things. I found that sort of with cheese and things like that with OMS.
Right. I mean, perhaps she was talking of cigarettes, possibly. Perhaps that was it, because obviously, smoking cigarettes is incredibly addictive, and unfortunately, if you like the taste and the rush you get from the cigarette first time off, you're probably going to stick with it. Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, so yeah, so to say to people, okay, yeah, you've got MS. Can we look at overhauling your diet and the way you are? I mean, one example, I had a patient fairly recently who smoked, who drank too much, that ate a lot of fast food, junk food, stroke other. And I was saying to him, have you thought about changing the way the way your lifestyle is? So about stopping smoking, changing your diet, and his whole family. Well, say his whole family, his wife and his 2 children and his mum, was in the consulting room with me, and they said, "Oh, thank goodness he's seeing you, Phil. He needs to be told this. We've told him this for years, and he's still eating the same way, still drinking, still smoking, and so now he's getting it from somebody that's got MS, who's a nurse and who's made lifestyle changes, and you can see how well they are, and so he's now gone away, and I've heard from him fairly recently saying that he'd stopped smoking. So, I mean, whether it was my influence or whether it was his his wife and children, mother's influence, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's probably it, because we mentioned, you've mentioned disease-modifying therapies, exercise, mindfulness, diet, vitamin D, but actually, smoking isn't actually one of the pillars. It's kind of like taken as read, isn't it? But it probably should be that. I'd probably say that first. Stop smoking.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely, indeed, because we know that smoking and the message that we give out, MS nurses give out and MS neurologists will give out, is that smoking will increase the speed of MS progression. That's what it does. How fast it increases individuals, we don't know. And so we always say that if there's one thing that you take away, lifestyle change, if you don't take anything else, if you smoke, the best thing you can do is stop smoking. And that's certainly one thing that neurologists would agree on wholeheartedly. A lifestyle change like stopping smoking. Some of the neurologists I work with are, if we mention healthy diet and exercise, many of them I've worked with more recently now, must admit more recently, are saying, healthy lifestyle is certainly going to improve how you are as a patient. They perhaps haven't said categorically that yes, this will, that whole food plant-based diet will improve your MS. But what they are saying is that the healthier you are, the better chance you've got with managing your MS. That, if you have fatigue, the best thing you can do is do some exercise, because we have medications that are there for fatigue, but they have got side effects and they don't always work. Whereas exercise, doing some exercise can actually, reduce the fatigue. And it's not necessarily about having to run or anything. It's exercise that you can do within your capabilities. Mm-hmm. And we know that to be certain, that exercise will improve the feelings of fatigue, and is probably the best way of helping you manage it. And I mean, certainly with disease-modifying treatments, the one thing that I would definitely say is that if you're advised to take a disease-modifying treatment, take it. Absolutely, alongside overcoming MS. Because I know many years ago, of course, the treatments weren't quite so good. Mm-hmm. There weren't as many disease-modifying treatments. The treatments that we had perhaps 20 years ago, I think we only had two: beta-ferron and Copaxone.
Yeah,
and that's quite limiting. So, unfortunately, if you had MS that was quite active, chances are it wasn't going to help you very much. Whereas now we've got an array of medications. We've got medication for secondary progressive MS. We've got a medication for primary progressive. It has changed significantly, and so I think that following OMS, fantastic. And I would say follow OMS as the whole package. Don't just pick out one. Follow the whole thing. That seems to work best if you do that, and also stick to your disease-modifying treatment.
And that is actually one of the pillars of OMS, isn't it? It's which I think is another thing that, when I was first looking at it, it was like, oh, actually, you're not saying that we need to live in a yurt and eat our own vegetables that we've grown, and go completely off grid. It's like, actually, oh no, you're saying that actually the science and everything is there, and medical professionals know what they're doing. That's actually one of the pillars. Where appropriate, take a disease modifying therapy. It's in
Absolutely.
there. So it's with exercise and mindfulness and vitamin D, that's another one of those things. Is where necessary, take a disease modifying therapy. I know there's a lot of people who follow OMS who don't. But equally, I'd say there's an awful lot of people following OMS who do. And it's
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, certainly within the last, I don't know, perhaps 10 years, I would imagine, the medications have made a significant change, and are still changing. There are other medications on the horizon, that are shown to be very promising in reducing MS relapses, and also reducing progression as well.
And does being an MS nurse who's got MS, does that how does that help you? Like, do you have insights for your patients? Does it help a huge amount?
What to tell my patients?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of treating a patient, does it make a big difference to you? Do you think that you've got MS? Does it change the way you treat your patient?
I think what definitely changes. I think I mean, all the MS nurses are great. Don't get me wrong. All the ones.
And you've got an MS nurse as well.
Yes,
that must be a very weird relationship. Anyway.
Yes. Well, it's strange. Funny enough, I probably speak to my MS nurse for about 5 minutes. We know each other fairly well, and then she would say, "Oh, what's going on in your service?" And I'd say, "Oh, X, Y, and Z." By the way, what's going up there in Nottingham? Oh, well, this is happening and that's happening and whatever. So, so it probably is a little bit different from how perhaps you would be with your MS nurse. But I think that certainly if perhaps if someone is struggling with MS, I'm fairly empathetic. I know where they're coming from. I think, well, okay, perhaps I've not quite had the struggle that you're having, but I've had facets of it that have come and gone, and so I know that that's not very nice. And so perhaps I can relate to it a bit more, and certainly what I found is that so for argument's sake, if someone is saying that they're finding it difficult to exercise because let's say that they're having spasms, or let's say that their legs feel very stiff. I would take them through doing stretches. And so what I have done before, if I'm in a consulting room with a patient, I'll say, okay, right, I know what we're going to do. I'm not just going to speak to you about stretches. I'm going to demonstrate them in front of you as well. And so we'll do them together. So I've done that, and say, if you stretch like that before doing exercise and stretch like that again afterwards, you will find it a little bit easier. Stretching your legs is great, particularly when we have MS.
Mm-hmm.
And I also say, I get very stiff legs. I mean, I do run a lot, but however, and I'm getting older, but also because I've got MS, sometimes my legs can feel very stiff, and I get not really spasms, but I get cramps. And so I find I have to do quite a bit of stretching before I run, and stretching afterwards. So I think, as I say, talking about exercise, when I come at it that way, say, well, look, my legs can hurt before exercise. This is what I do, and this is what I do afterwards, and just take it steady. I think that helps quite a bit, because again, the patient in front of me is thinking, well, perhaps I've got to try exercise now, because I've got MS nurse exercises, says that they get achy legs that I get, and has just shown me how I can possibly overcome it. So I suppose I'm going to have to try it now.
And another thing, sort of, because you're in this almost or possibly unique position, from the other side, is there any tips that you've got for us as patients of how we interact with MS professionals, either to make our treatment potentially better, or to help the professionals in giving them information, or how we deal with the professionals? Is there any tips you'd have of how we would, as patients, would interact with nurses and neurologists?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I would say is that certainly at diagnosis, or if you're asked about, how are you, um, what we get from many patients is, so I'm okay. Oh,
I
okay.
think that's quite a British thing, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I was going to say that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah. I thought I won't
There's the
say
sort of
that,
thing,
but
if you
you beat
say,
me to
if
it.
your wife says she's fine, that probably means you're in trouble. Is a
It
particularly
means
British thing when she goes fine. It's like, oh,
fine,
yeah,
fine, and then won't speak to you.
yeah.
You know you're in trouble. Absolutely. Um, but yeah, I would say being very honest with your nurse. So, if the nurse asks, okay, how are you getting on? Oh, well, saying fine, and as a lot of patients do, will say, oh, I've not been too bad. And we don't always get the full story. I'd always say that if you have got that time with your nurse, if you've got that time with your neurologist, be straight up. Say, well, look, I've got this problem, I've got that problem, or I've found this, or I've found that, um, uh, and just being straight and honest. I've found this probably is great, because then we can help a lot more. Um, Certainly we have had people in the past that have perhaps not always been, and I don't mean this horribly, but perhaps not always told us honestly what's going on. And we then find out, perhaps later on, they might ring up and say, oh, by the way, I've had this for quite a while. And you think, well, I had an appointment with you last month. Oh, yeah, well, I didn't really like to mention it. Well, tell us. Absolutely, tell us.
Yeah, and some
Um,
of the things are embarrassing, and they might be. It could be incontinence. It could be a sexual
yeah,
thing. It could,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
you
indeed.
got to spill the beans, haven't you?
Well, absolutely. And again, and I'll be honest, I've had bladder issues before. There we go. It's out there. Everyone knows now. But uh, if I'm talking to a patient, they say, "Oh, I'm having to get up, Phil, 2 or 3 times a night, and oh, it's embarrassing. Sometimes I don't make it to the toilet in time. I don't really want to speak to a nurse about it. I don't really want to go to a bladder and bowel clinic about it. And I say, well, why not? I've been.
Yeah.
Have you?
And
So,
there's
oh yeah.
treatments as well, isn't there? Because it's
And
not,
this,
so there's
yeah,
disease modifying therapy for MS, but also
yes,
we've got a load of symptoms. So I
yeah,
think there's two things going on, isn't there? There's the big thing, treat the MS, but then there's the other thing of, like, you've got these, and so yeah, I've had treatment for bladder, and they work, and they've got things that
yeah,
work, and then you can
yeah,
sort that one out, and you're like, okay, well, if you
yeah.
can sort out the symptoms and then sort out the underlying cause of the symptoms, then you're most of the way there.
Absolutely. And of course, us with MS, unfortunately, one of the regular infections that we can get is urine infection. So, in actual fact, if you're getting up and down, worrying about it, thinking, oh, I'm having to go to the loo again, I'm having to go to the loo again, oh my goodness, it might not be anything to do with the MS. It might be, in actual fact, you've got a urine infection
Mm.
that's making the MS worse. With antibiotics, you can be right as rain in a few days.
And this is one, actually. This is something I told my MS nurse that I sort of put out there. It's a treatment they use in Germany, I believe, and maybe other places. It's a thing called D-mannose, which is
Yeah.
a tablet you take every day, and it that basically sorted out my urinary tract infections completely.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
And it's just a tablet you take every day. It's cheaply available on major online retailers, I'm sure, other places.
Yeah.
And my MS nurse looked. She was sort of unaware of it. She looked into it. The next time I saw her, she goes, "Oh, that's a really good tip." And she goes, "Yeah, they do use it in other places in the world. We don't prescribe it here, but it's not expensive
No.
anyway." So,
No.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that's
Crack
been
on.
really good, actually.
Yes, and also, hydration is a biggie. So again, my advice to anybody really is drink plenty of water. I've been as guilty of not drinking enough as the next person, getting really dehydrated, feeling very thirsty, exercising and not having enough to drink. Um, And of course, the thing is that, as we're saying about bladder infections, is that we need to keep the bladder flushed, keep it flushed very well, plenty of water, great. That's what's going to do it. If you don't drink enough, obviously, we then start to perhaps possibly see an increase in urine infections potentially, and also, I mean, that's definitely the main thing I would say, is that when you're speaking to MS nurses, when you're speaking to your neurologist, also write things down, keep a diary. So if you think that you have got a particular symptom, just jot it down somewhere. Somewhere you're going to find it. Somewhere you're not going to forget about it. So it could be a jotter, it could be a diary, and then every time it happens, again, just write it down, so that when you do speak to one of us, you can then say, well, I've had X, Y, and Z happen, and it's happened a few times now, and I've written it down when it happens. That's really useful for us. So then we can obviously manage these symptoms a lot better. We would. Which obviously, so I've forgotten my train of thought now, which helps us greatly, and also what it can do is that if you're writing things down and a symptom occurs, if I then speak to that patient, I say, okay, writing it down is great. Can you also think about what time of day it happens? So, if your fatigue is worse, or if your spasms are worse, what's your sleep like? Are you stressed? Are you exercising at all? Is anything else changed anywhere? What is your hydration like? Have you had any recent infections? And that then, obviously then helps us greatly. Then we can then manage it far better, and manage our patients obviously far better, and hopefully, because the idea with MS, of course, is that what you want to do is it's a long-term condition. It's not a condition that is going to end your life very quickly. This is a condition for life. We're now seeing that in actual fact, people with MS have got a near to normal lifespan as any other person has. So it's about managing your conditions. It's about being honest with your nurse. If your nurse or neurologist asks you perhaps to keep a diary, or to think, just think over the next week about how often these symptoms have occurred, it's really helpful to us, because what we're trying to do is that we want you to live the best life that you possibly can. And so again, going back to OMS, we know that from the data and from the research and from the evidence, that if you follow a diet rich in fruit and vegetables, little or no processed meat, exercise regularly, stress reduction, so meditation. Meditation can take many different forms, perhaps. So for again, one person said to me, I don't meditate formally, but what I do is I do enjoy painting. Okay, well, when you're painting, what do you do? Oh, well, it's great. Paint outside, and I haven't got a care in the world. Well, there you go, then that's your meditation.
Yeah, or are you saying running? I think running is a very meditative practice.
Yes.
Or like my daughter's a very keen swimmer, and I think that just doing things like that, you can be meditating while you're exercising, or while you're walking the dog, or while you're painting, or although I think any sort of like art form almost is almost certainly is a mindful activity.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not heavy rock guitarist, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is. I haven't tried.
Well, indeed, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I'm running along, in my ears, I might have Queen blaring out, or AC/DC, or anything. Dare I say, a bit of Cliff, and yeah, it's all helpful. I think the thing is that if you've got something that takes you away from just the worries and the stresses of the world, it can do. And I do meditation most days, and yeah, great. But if you're painting, or if you're enjoying your exercise and you're happy, you're contented, it's taking you away from your worries for half an hour, great. Fantastic. And yeah, it is about living the best life you possibly can for life.
Brilliant. Okay. So firstly, thank you very much. I think that has been a unique insight that we haven't had before, because we had experts on before, we had people with MS on before, but it's having that sort of crossover has been brilliant. And just to wrap up though, do you have any final tips for our listeners? Maybe sort of the newly diagnosed people, or what sort of key takeaway tips would you give to people?
Okay, so certainly with MS, I mean, the first thing I would say is the treatments. So from what people read, particularly online, things can appear quite scary. I would say that if you're newly diagnosed, the MS treatments are very different to what they used to be years ago. We've got many different treatments, and treatments that work very well. I would say that if we've got somebody that's listening to this that wants to follow the Overcoming MS program, or not quite sure where to start, or thinking, how do I follow a whole food plant-based diet? It means a lot of preparation. What I do is I get a bag of stir fry. So basically it's vegetables that have been washed and prepared in a bag. That's it. There's nothing on them. I cut a little hole in the bag. I put a few drops of water in the bag, stick it in the microwave, 3 minutes. Obviously, microwaves vary, so don't take my word for it. You don't want something that's crispy and crackled. But essentially, 3 minutes in the microwave. Out, you've got your bag of stir fry. I then put soy sauce on it, a few spices. That's it, and it's taken me 5 minutes. Jacket potatoes, great. Again, microwave 10 minutes. Air fryers, fantastic. Where would we be without an air fryer? I know. Yeah, I got one for Christmas. It's amazing.
Yeah. I'm a massive convert as well.
Yes. So, it's not that difficult. And certainly with Overcoming MS, if you look at the recipes on the Overcoming MS website and other tips and ideas, it's lots of different ideas that people can follow. And of course, Overcoming MS is on Facebook. It's on Instagram. So, if you're a young person with MS that think, well, I don't know, okay, yeah, there's a website, but, I haven't got time to scroll through a website. Is there some? Yeah, just click on Facebook. There are different Overcoming MS Facebook communities. There's one I follow, Overcoming MS support on Facebook. Just ask a question and you get an answer pretty much straight away. So if you're newly diagnosed, you've got lots and lots of help. And say MS is frightening. When you're newly diagnosed, it is frightening, but that it does settle down. It does settle, and there is hope, definitely, and there is a life to be lived with MS. You can live a very good life, and my final thing I would say is that I look. You probably think I'm going to be nuts. I'm nuts even, but I look as MS as a gift now, which I never thought I'd say. But MS is a gift. It's shown me so many different things, different ways of living. It's, different friend groups. If I was told tomorrow, Phil, we've made a big mistake, you haven't got MS, I wouldn't change my lifestyle at all. Definitely not.
Brilliant. And with that, thank you very much for joining us, Phil King.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find useful links and bonus information there. Have questions or ideas to share? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org, or you can reach out to Jeff on Twitter @JeffAlex. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time for tips on living a full and happy life with MS.